Welcome back, everyone, to this week's edition of the Cart Barn Podcast. I'm Chris Limley, joined by Greg DeWalt. We thank you so much for joining us again this week for another edition of the Cart Barn. Before we get into this week's podcast, the PGA Tour wrapped up its season this past weekend, and friend of the podcast, Lee Hodges, kind of right on that bubble.
Definitely on the bubble, finished 101 on the points list, which, you and I talked briefly. The tour is changing considerably when it comes to being exempt on the tour, and it's gone from 125 exempt players to 100, and unfortunately Lee finished 101 on the list. So, but not to worry, because he's going to have status. He's going to get into at least 20 events, 25 events, I think. So he's going to have plenty of opportunity to move into that top 100 and stay there.
Yeah, he's got 4 or 5 medical exemptions still left, and also being a past champion, his status will be pretty high. I'm not sure how many points it'll take for him to get to his card back. The way he's playing right now, I think it'll happen pretty quickly.
He made a heck of a move because he started the week at like 122, and he needed it changed daily, but he needed to be around the top 3, top 4 finish to get into the top 100. I think he finished T4, 66 in the final round, but we were talking. Somebody made a long putt on the last hole, and it knocked him and another guy off the 100 list. So, but Lee's going to get, he's got opportunity to get back on there, and I'm sure he will do it and keep his card, and hopefully wins again and takes a lot of that stress off.
So if you've been playing golf very long, you've probably heard of TP Mills. You may even have one, or you've seen one. TP Mills putters are made in Tuscaloosa. This company started there. It's run by the son of TP. His name's David Mills. Great putters with a lot of history that I knew about, and some of it I didn't. But I think everyone's going to enjoy our time with David Mills this week.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and you think about it today, in today's day and age, you've got all these major manufacturers dominating the industry: Titleist, TaylorMade, Callaway, Ping. But Alabama really has carved out a niche in club making and the golf industry. Going back to Burton Baggs in Jasper, Alabama,
Yeah,
you got TP Mills, Odie Chrisman, just a plethora of
and Tad
golf
Moore.
has come, and Tad Moore. It's incredible that from a historic standpoint how important Alabama has been to the golf industry. And yet, TP Mills may not be a household name, but I guarantee you've seen them, or you've played with one. Your dad probably played with one from back in the day. So
Well,
this is a fascinating episode.
it is, Greg, and not to give too much away, but he's shared some stories about some of the current day players that everyone is going to know about that he's currently making putters for.
Yeah, just to drop an S bomb. Guy's first name is Scotty, and I'm not talking Cameron. I'm talking the number 1 player in the world. We'll just tease that, Scotty Scheffler. He
Yeah.
may or may not own a TP Mills putter. So I think that's a good place to kind of lead the audience into this week's podcast. So why don't we just go ahead and get underway with David Mills of TP Mills Putters.
Welcome back to the Cart Barn. Today, we're very excited to welcome David Mills into the Cart Barn. His dad started the TP Mills Putter Company in Tuscaloosa, and David's going to share that story and his story and some of the things that he has going on now. So, David, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Cart Barn.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
David, it's been quite a journey for your family with this golf stuff. Your dad was an engineer, as I understand it, and just started making putters. Why don't you kind of give us a little background there?
Well, he was a good player when he was a young man, but in those days, probably in the late 50s, early 60s, there weren't too many options for putters, and irons, as you guys know, were forgings and not all that great at that time. But he just, he thought about it. His background in the service was working on aircraft engines, and some of that bled off to some of his markings on his clubs. But he had a small, good gracious, a shop behind our old house, which is it was no bigger than much of a closet, and he just he didn't have any CNC machines. He didn't even have any knee mills. He just had grinders and files and heat and determination. And he thought he could make maybe a better club than what was available. And so he started doing that. And I'll tell this similar story, but it take him 3 weeks to make a club, and the only person that would take one from him was his family because they felt sorry for him. So, but he charged about 20. Oh, he probably started charging about $10 a club. So 3 weeks worth of work for $10 a club. But he wanted to make his clubs different. He wanted to give them what I call a good balance point on the face, and making it different, he decided to make a black putter, and nobody had ever made a black putter at that time, and he used the same process you blew a handgun or a rifle in, a black oxide finish, and that was pretty much unheard of. He wanted to mark the clubs so people know that it was him that was making them. In those times, there were no really markings on the face of the club, so he put his name on it, and then when he joined Spalding, they used his initials, which people are familiar with, the TPM, and those are his initials. And then, he started gaining a little bit of traction, and Coach Bryant became a good friend of his, and that really started it because Coach Bryant would go play in these celebrity pro-ams, and he would take a couple of my dad's putters to try them, and then the pros would see him. And of course, in those days, in the early 60s, they'd really never seen anything like that. So they all wanted to try him. And before you knew it, he became very popular. But the one thing that was unique to him and to me at some point was that because there was no money in golf at that time, he charged players for the putters. So it didn't matter who they were or how famous or non-famous they were. If they wanted one of his clubs, they had to pay for it. So it was and it wasn't done for anything of an ego. He just needed money to live on. He was a postman at the time. My mom was a housewife. So, and I wasn't even, I was born in 61. So I would just come along, and I have an older brother and sister that were probably early teenagers. But it was done for the purpose of making a living. But that kind of also became one of his trademarks that, no matter who you were going to pay for the golf club if you wanted it. And one of the greatest stories that early in his career that I told this at a couple of gatherings, but it's a true story, is that Palmer, Trevino, Middlecoff, all the players, Irwin, had all paid to the club, and they started off at $10, $15, and $25, and then $35. And we had some old checks that we just took pictures of just for memorabilia to some of the great players that were using the club. But he had a young pro come to him and ask him to build him a club, and so my dad did it. I think a few weeks later, the pro said, "Mr. Mills said I got a problem with the golf club." And he said, "Well, what's going on? What's wrong with it? If I can fix it, I will." He said, "No, it's not the club." He goes, "It's a wonderful club." He said, "I love it." He said, "I'm excited to use it." He said, "But my father is my manager, and we don't pay for golf clubs." Well, my dad said, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't give it to you." And, he couldn't do it because he charged the other players. So he had to be, consistent. And the player said, "Well, Mr. Mills one day says, I'm going to be a good player." He said, I'll give you a lot of advertising. And I really love the putter. But it's my dad's call. I think the putter was $35. And, my dad said, I'm sure you are going to be, young man, but I can't give it to you." And there was a gentleman there that knew both of them. He was a big Chevrolet dealer in Memphis. He said, "Till you hardheads get together," says, "I'm just going to hold this club, and one of y'all will have to give in." And so my dad said, "That's fine." And young pro said, "Okay." And The pro wouldn't his daddy wouldn't let him buy it, and my dad wasn't going to give it away. And that same young pro, they say, went a couple of weeks later to a pro shop, picked up a club called the George Low and won 18, 19 major championships. It was Nicholas. True story. I told my dad, I said, Dad, I said, you probably should have given that one away.
Who knew, right?
Yeah, who knew? But he told him, he said, I'm going to be a good player, Mr. Mills. He said, I'll give you a lot of advertising. But I think my dad needed $35 more than he needed what would later come, I guess, was some great advertising. So anyway, that was one that kind of slipped through. I was just a small child then, but yeah, that's a pretty neat story.
That's a great story.
Could you talk a little bit about the craftsmanship that your dad put into each putter as opposed to now, how things are?
Well, what he did, that he really studied the golf putter and what made the club work. And he knew the balance on most of the clubs. Now, you have to understand at those times, there weren't many putters out there. There were really, back a little bit before that, where they're basically iron clubs bent to no law for putters. And they all used what you'd call an iron shaft. They just took an iron shaft and cut it shorter. The only people that had kind of started in the golf putter business then were Carson had started very early, and Reuter had started his very first, I guess, the bullseye. And so Dad came along with what he called a flanged model. There really weren't any putters with what you call a modern flange. And another true story that ties into that people would never think of is that my dad actually designed the flange bullseye for Acushnet. And he told me that when he was still living, and I didn't really believe him. I thought he might have had a shot or two of whiskey, but he said, if you don't believe me, he said, you can call my patent attorney. And I got to thinking, there were a lot of those putters sold, and I don't see any new cars in the driveway or anything like that. So I did call him. His name was Mackie Manning, and this was back in the early 80s. I said, Mackie, is this true? He said, it is true. I said, well, what's the genesis of it? He said, well, Acushnet Reuter had just started his bullseye, and Acushnet wanted a model that had a flange similar to what your dad had started. So your dad went down to the Grand Hotel in Mobile and met Reuter and the president of Acushnet, and they got together and came up with the flange, and your dad showed him how to do it, this, that, and the other. And I said, well, Mackie, I don't, shouldn't he have got something for that? And he goes, well, they paid him. And I said, well, what did he get out of it? He said they gave him $1,500 and some free golf shirts. And that there again, that's a true story.
Wow. There was a relationship with Spalding. That may be the beginning of the OEM process that we see so much with now. And of course, I know that you had a relationship, I think, with Mizuno, but can you elaborate a little bit about that relationship?
Well, when he started going out on the tour, he started getting traction. There was really nobody who did anything like what he did. He would make up the golf clubs in his shop, probably 8 or 10 pieces, and put them in the trunk of his car. And he would drive down to Orlando. I guess that was the Bay Hill at the time in the early days. And he said back in those days, he never even went to the putting green. He said the pros would see him come in, and they would all come around the trunk of his car. He'd open the trunk, and then they'd all start grabbing clubs and, wiggle them and putting with them. And before you knew it, he sold all, I think it's probably maybe $100 then. But he'd sold all of them before he got them to the green. But that ties into a trademark that we have. And I remember him talking to me about this. He said, I would used to put a line on a club, and inevitably one of the pros would look at that line and say, Mr. Mills, that line looks like it's on crooked. And it probably was not on crooked, but in the pro's eyes, he saw it as crooked. And my dad thought about that, and he said, if the guy's focusing on the putter and not on the hole, it's not a good thing. So he came back, and he came up with the idea of an oval circle. And that's what, as you see on a lot of the custom stuff and even some of the production stuff, was the oval circle. We got that trademarked. And the reason he did an oval circle is he wanted to show the player, number one, where the true sweet spot on the putter was. And then number two, he wanted to have something up there that you couldn't see it going left or right. He just showed you where to put the ball so you could focus on making the putt. And that's kind of ironic that that became a trademark. I think when Tiger started on the tour, he wanted that on his club, and they couldn't do it because it was a Mills trademark. So they did the punch. But that's the crosshairs that he became famous on the face. Those tied back to his military service. That was actually I'm not an airplane guy, but on the dash of those fighter planes, they had a crosshairs on them, and that's where it gave him the idea of making those crosshairs on the face. So that later became a trademark also. So that's kind of the genesis of those two marks. But yeah, when he joined Spalding, they had seen that and thought we need someone to maybe do this, and they contacted him, and they entered into an agreement, and he became part of their staff and started designing clubs for them. And the very early ones that he did are quite valuable, because in those days they actually tried to make them as close to his custom stuff as they could. They would forge the club, they would actually blue it, they would give put a ferrule on it, and they a little end cap on the grip to make it look custom, and those were the earliest. What's unique about some of those earliest pieces that even epoxy must not have been really refined, because a lot of those early have what's called a screw-in shaft, and so the threads were reversed on it. You hit a putt, the putter wouldn't tighten, but it wouldn't loosen, and some of the people have got those would play hell trying to get the shaft off because they don't know it's screwed in there. They'll never get it off with heat. So I thought that but then he later expanded his line of clubs, and they started selling them really all over the world. So it was a pretty neat ride for him. He got to meet a lot of famous people. I got to meet a lot of famous people. He got invited to the White House, which was quite an honor. And so he had a good run there. Still did his handmade clubs. People had asked him, said, "Well, why didn't you retire?" He goes, "Well, he didn't know the golf business would really explode like it did, so he wanted to keep his postman's job so he'd get his retirement check all while doing all the rest of it." So
that was going to be my next question. When did he kind of transition full time? Apparently, he never did.
He never did transition full time. He always would get in the shop, and that's really where I started learning. Is he would get in the shop and piddle and make the things, and he would put me on one operation and I'm not mechanically inclined. At least I wasn't, and I'm really still not. But I can make any of the machines do what I need them to do, and that's that works. So, but yeah, I started just watching, apprenticing him, and kind of got into it, and he tells a story. I probably ruined more good putters than I ever made good ones, but that was part of it. I finally kind of caught on, and then got pretty good at it myself.
Cool. Well, you and I've had conversations before, especially back when you were making a putter for me, about the scoring records and some of the guys that played with your putters. You want to dive into that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I don't want to toot our horn too much, but TP in his early days, he won a lot of major championships. He's multiple U.S. Open, Masters champions, U.S. Amateur, British Amateur, and really every event on the tour. I've won many. I haven't won a major, but the club I made set the all-time scoring record that was held for, I guess, 26 years. It was done by Tommy Armour when he won the Texas Open, which was kind of a nice thing. And he actually paid for the golf club too, which was a bonus. But yeah, I've been lucky enough to create some pretty neat stuff. I remember back in the early 2000s, I made a club for myself. I wanted to start playing left-handed because I was frustrated playing right-handed, and I made it from scratch like TP did, just blocks of steel and welded, and and it was more of a blade putter. And when I got it out of the vise that I used to set lies and lofts, that's all done by feel. There's no machines that do it. It had about 6 degrees of loft on it, which was too much for me. And as I started to readjust it, I thought, who putts with a putter's got loft on it? And of course, Mickelson popped into my head, but I didn't know him, and I didn't know that he knew us at all. But as ironic as things happened, I got a phone call probably the next day from a guy named Bill Grove. Bill was a native of North Carolina, and he had a great story about TP, but he was in charge of all the tournament players clubs from Mississippi all the way to the West Coast. And he called and said, "Hey, your dad made me a putter back in the 70s." He said he wanted $200 for it. I'd never heard of a club that was $200. I told him nobody'd ever pay for a club that was $200. But he said the more I putted with it, the more I liked it. And I got him down to like 175, or whoever the gentleman had it, and he bought it. He said that was about 2 weeks worth of salary for me. But the reason I'm calling you is that I've had it for 35 or 40 years, and I just had it stolen out of my bag, and I'm I can't believe it, and it's one of a kind. And can you make another one? And he did not have a picture of it, but I did the best I could with the year and what he described. But I'd mentioned to him if he knew Mickelson. He goes, I know him well. And I said, he said, send it to me. I'll make sure he gets it. And so I didn't finish the club. It was just raw steel, and I put a black shaft in it. And the very next week, he had it and was leading one of the tournaments, maybe the one out in Arizona, one of the desert events. But a week after that, he called me, and he goes, David, this putter you made is one of the most solid putter I've ever putted with. He said, I really like it. He goes, I would like some backups also. My dad was still alive at that time, and I know my dad would not have given him the golf club, although he was probably the second best player in the world. And so I told Phil, I said, Phil, we still charge for the clubs. And he says, how much is it? And I told him it was $800. And there was a pause on the phone. So, him being the second best player in the world at the time, and I'm charging him $800 for a club. And I thought, well, that may be into this conversation, but he popped back, said, fantastic. He said, I'll buy that one and two more. And he sent me a check for $2,400. And he went on to beat Tiger with that putter. First time he'd ever beaten Tiger at Tour. He won 2 or 3 tour events with it. And so we kind of became buddies, I guess, at that time. I got to know him a little bit better, and he really respected what I do. And even after he changed companies, if he came up with something he thought was new from another manufacturer, he would look me up and say, hey, David, what do you think about this? And I would do my best to tell him what I thought was good about it and what I thought might not be so good about it. And I think he appreciated what little advice I could give him over the years. I hadn't seen him in a while, but that was pretty nice. And I've had other instances where players have won with clubs I've made them, and without advertising or paying them, I think that's pretty neat.
That's real neat.
Absolutely. What do you think was the attraction back then of a TP Mills putter to these guys that made them want it so much? Because like I say, Acushnet was putting out Bullseye was probably the most popular, I think, back in the day. Wilson had the 8802 was very popular, but there must have been something about the TPM that made it a must-have item.
Well, the one thing that he did, obviously, nobody never ever seen a black putter. He understood the engineering of a golf putter pretty well, and he knew that a putter with a hosel on it, like an iron club, made for a better, more solid, more stable putter. Just like your iron clubs, all of your iron clubs have hosels on them. The hosel's on the club, because what it does, it takes the center of gravity on the face and it moves it up to where you want to hit the ball at. I know Eli Callaway, which ties into another story. He had, Eli Callaway started Callaway, and he was a manufacturer of wine. He was not in the golf business. And another great story, true story, is he was social friends with a guy that's passed away, and I think his name may have been Preston Brown, but I don't know. And Preston was in our shop. He was a master PGA professional who had retired and was doing other things and making good money. He says, Dave, I got a story to tell you. He said, it's a true story. He said, Eli and his wife were friends of ours, and we play occasionally, and he saw the putter that your dad had made for my wife, and he wanted it. And I said, what do you want the club for? He goes, I'm going to get in the golf business, and I'd like to have that putter. And he said, well, I'd rather not sell it. Or he said, I'll pay you whatever you want for it. He said, well, I'm not going to sell it to you, but I'll let you borrow it if you'll return it. He said that he would, and he asked him, what do you need it for? He goes, well, he said, TP Mills makes the best putters in the world, and I'm going to get in the golf club business, and I need something pattern my putters after. So if you remember, the early lines of Callaway's looked just like the TPM Spaldings. He gave the putter back to Preston and sent him a couple of cases of wine and said, thank you for your help. So, Eli had passed away quite a while ago, but I was told the story before he did. And I thought it'd be neat to go up to him at the trade show, and if he was still going at that time, and introduce myself, and he probably would have got a big kick out of that. But that's that story is, Callaway is obviously the biggest golf club company in the world. And back, gosh, it's been 8 or 10 years ago that they had called me, actually, or one of the representatives there, who was a friend of mine from years ago, had called and wanted to talk to me. And a mutual friend said, hey, he wants to talk to you. And I thought, look, I can't talk to him. Said, I thought the Chip Brewer, who was the president, still is, was probably getting rid of some people, and I couldn't afford to hire him. I liked him, but I couldn't afford to hire him, and I didn't really want to talk to him. And another guy called back and said, no, he wants you to come out there. So I called him and we visited. He said, we'd really like you to come out here and visit with us. And so I did, and he flew in here and stayed with us a couple of days and saw the shop. And anyway, he said, look, we're the number one selling putter company in the world by far, but we really can't give a club away that's over about $300, and people just won't buy our clubs for that price. They'll buy the Titleist's all day long, but they won't buy ours. And we would like to discuss to you about joining our company and maybe using your reputation, your family's reputation, what you do in that shop. You don't advertise, you don't even go out and tour much, but nobody can really do what you do. And we can't do that, but we're great advertisers, and we could take what you do in the shop and we could blow it up, and we could make a run after Titleist. We're very confident we can, and have some good success. So obviously that was flattering that they would, look at me to maybe do that. And so I flew out a few times, had dinner with the president team, and things, seemed to go well. And I was kind of excited about it, not to be anything other than what I could contribute to the company, because I've although I work with basic stuff, I've got some pretty good ideas and have come up with some pretty good stuff. But anyway, we were kind of excited about it, and but didn't hear from them for a while. So I got, wondered what had happened, and I made a phone call, and they said, no, you're still the big thing, but we've had some internal changes. And in those big golf club companies, they have what they call teams. You have a putter team that oversees that. You have a wood team, iron team, and they, they're in their pods and they do their thing. And my putter team consisted of Austie Rollinson, and Austie was, ironically, he's now with Titleist, but Austie did all the Odysseys for 30 years. So if you ever putted with an Odyssey putter, Austie was the one that designed it. And a couple of other people there in that, the president of the marketing and R&D guy who's vice president, and everything, was just couldn't have been better. But there was a delay there, and I said, what's going on? They said, well, Chip's made some changes, and the marketing president has gone to work for another company. The Tim has gone to be global tour operations, and there was really nobody left in the putter department. So they said, we just got to find someone to come in here and maybe help out. And it just didn't have the same, I don't know how to say it, quite the same feel and excitement about what could be done. And it just didn't, after a while, it didn't just didn't feel like it'd be to my advantage. I talked to Roger Cleveland, who was with them at the time, and Roger kind of felt the same way. So I thanked him and just kept doing what I was doing. So, but that was nice of them to
Mm-hmm.
I guess come to our company and say we would like for you guys to be the ones that do this. So, but they've done well. Obviously, they're doing quite well. They probably didn't need me anyway, but it was a nice gesture.
When you grow up watching your dad make these clubs, when did you kind of fall in love with it? Because a lot of kids would not follow in their father's footsteps in something like that.
Well, when I started working with him, uh, I wasn't very good. I didn't really understand golf club design, but obviously we went through things, and I kind of got to where I understood a little more about what was going on and what made clubs work. And then I can remember him buying a simple thing like a rotary table. A rotary table is just something where you can put a golf club in or a piece of metal in, and you can turn the handle and it'll cut a radius. As simple as that sounds. Because before that, it was really all handwork. And when I was able to not mess up quite as many and understood, that operation and what I could do with a flange, and it just kind of the light bulb went off. And then I'm a decent player, and so I putted with everybody's putter. And I found out what makes putters stable, what makes them work. And that doesn't mean you may want to use that particular brand, but it was made as good as it could be made. It was made as solid as it could be made, and stable, and so really, regardless of the shape that I make now, those ingredients really have to be there, regardless of what the putter looks like, for me to sell it for what I hope it can perform. But the hosel is an important part of a putter. It's there again, I mentioned earlier, it keeps the center of gravity up. Now, there's some mallets that don't have a hosel, and they're done a little differently, and it still works. You guys may have seen all the popular spiders and the two balls and things like that. And what for your guys who are listening, what makes those putters work? There's positive and negative things about really any golf putter or even an iron that you're trying to weigh. But the thing about a putter where the mass is weighted near the rear of the putter, there's a couple things that aren't good about that. And the one thing, the more you move the mass away from the face of a golf club, the more unstable that club becomes, and the worse it feels when you hit a shot with it. So if you want to think about it in simple terms, if I'm a tightrope walker and I've got the long pole that keeps me balanced, and think of the pole as my MOI, just flip me on my side, think of it that way. If the wind starts blowing, I don't push that pole over my head because it makes me more unstable. I'll fall off the rope easier. Common sense says you'll take that pole, you'll drop it down close to the rope to keep you more stable. That same principle applies with golf clubs and golf putters, in that the further the MOI is away from the face of the club, the more unstable it becomes. You can think of the guy on the rope, and it doesn't feel as well because the mass is away from the striking surface. Now, those are the two poor things about that, but there is a positive about it, because people say, well, why do so many people use these clubs? Well, the positive part about that is that I call it the direction of travel, which means once the club starts in a direction, it tends to want to stay in that motion. If you want to think about, I use this example quite a bit, but if you want to think about trains on a track, if you have three cabooses on a track, and then the engine is in the rear, and they go down the track at a fast speed, and you've got a wall on that track they can't penetrate. Well, those first three trains, because there's no mass there, those empty cabooses, when they hit that wall, they're going to splinter and prove to go everywhere. But that mass, the engine wants to keep moving in that direction. It doesn't stop. So if you can think of it that way, I've used like moving something heavy. Once you want to stop, it tends to want to keep going. So whenever you take the mass and move it away from the face, the direction of travel improves. Just when you flipped it around and you put the engine on the front, like your bullseye and the TPM1, because all the mass is right at the face, when that engine hits that wall, it's going to put a dent in it, and that's going to create a nice sound, obviously, if you're hitting a golf club with it. But if that makes any sense, that is kind of your scenario. Putters that are weighted in the rear, and then putters more conventional that are weighted near the face. So anything that's weighted near the front of it's going to be a little more stable, a little more solid, but it's not going to have quite as good a direction of travel. So if that makes any sense, that's kind of how that works.
Absolutely does. David, what's your take on the craze right now of the zero torque putters?
Well, it's a very popular club. It had been done in the past, but not the way these guys did it, as far as the shape of the head, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with a zero torque putter. If it works for you, great. The zero torque, the term zero torque, has nothing to do with hitting the ball on the putter face.
Yeah.
Anybody that makes that type of a putter, the putter face is going to have torque, and probably more torque than a normal putter. But what they're talking about when they say zero torque is they're talking about swinging the head on the shaft. In other words, when you're swinging the head on the shaft, the face doesn't want to open or close. It doesn't want to. It stays right with your motion of your swing. So it was that they call it zero torque, but it doesn't really have anything to do with hitting the golf ball. Zero torque on a golf putter would be similar to driving a car around a curve of a road. As you drive the car around the curve of a road and you pick up your speed, you can feel the inertia push you out or push the car a little bit. So you'll know by that feeling, you'll know how fast or slow you can go around that turn. Whereas if it were, say, a zero torque car, when you go around that turn, you won't have any feeling at all. There's no feeling of movement one way or the other. So some people like to have that feeling, and that they can, it helps them feel the head of the putter when they're stroked. Other, the zero torque is you don't feel that. So it's no better, no worse. It's just a different way to do it. But the torque on anybody's zero torque has nothing to do with the ball hitting the putter face. That is a different animal. They all have torque on them. What you're trying to do on a golf iron or a putter is you're trying to spread the weight around the center, the sweet spot on the face. So if you decide where you want, just like an iron club, iron clubs have hosels on them, and you can take an iron club and you can take the head off of it, and you can stick your thumb on the face and you can shake it, and it doesn't really want to move. It's extremely stable. That's why when you hit a shot with an iron in the sweet spot, it feels so good. They all have nice hosels on them, and as you progress through the set, the hosel on an iron club, obviously it becomes more loft. So, I use this scenario of the guy on the tightrope and his pole. If it's over his head, he's not as stable. As he drops it down to the rope, it becomes more stable. Well, think of the same guy on that rope with, on the end of his pole, he's got ropes hanging off the end of his pole each end, and on the end of the rope, he's got, say, bags of sand or something that are now below the rope. Well, now his center of gravity or his mass is now below the rope. It's not above it. It's not below the rope, which is going to make him even more stable on that bicycle or whatever he's walking on. And if you think of, say, a lofted iron, the reason they feel so good, the hosel, if you lay an iron face flat on the table, the hosel, obviously more loft, points down. So that's the same concept as the weight. So you take a pitching wedge, sand wedge, you can shake it, it's not moving. That's why they feel so good when you hit them. So the location of the mass on the face, where it is on the face, is important, and how you can move the weight around that point, not left and right, but also up and down. So you're trying to move it left and right and up and down. You don't want the mass on the face to be, for instance, a lot of companies say, hey, our putters are the best heel toe weighted putters in the business, and we can prove it. And they probably are. But it would be very similar if you spread your legs out real far. If you bumped you from the left or the right, you're going to be very stable, but just a touch front and back, you're going to flip over. So obviously they're good one way, but not the other. So your best balanced golf clubs, putters, are ones where you're trying to spread the weight on not only left and right, but you're trying to get it up and down. So the putters that I do, and you'll notice the flange, the bottom of the flange, the toe weight will be a little bigger than the heel weight, and the hosel will have weight. So that hosel is is, there again, it keeps the center of gravity on the face where I think it should be. So if you make a good stroke, you're gonna get that, that feeling. And here last spring, I got a call from Jordan Spieth, and uh, he had putted with a Mills putter, and long story short, I'd made one up and sent one out to a mutual friend, and Jordan had hurt his wrists that winter or the spring before, and he was in his basement. He's got all types of I guess, testing equipment for golf putters, and he was testing all of his Titleist putters because he's won a lot with them, and he's their brand ambassador. And he kept putting with that Mills, and he told Frank, he said, listen, he goes, the Mills is so much more stable than all this Titleist. David, mind if I call him and ask him why? So he called me, and we spoke about 45 minutes, and a little bit of what we talked about here today. But he said, look, he said, your putter is so stable. When I hit the ball, I just want to know why and how you did that. And as competitive as the golf business is, and Titleist is one of the obviously very competitive. I told him a little bit about it, but I wasn't going to tell him everything because the Titleist guys are going to be on him. And I told him when we finished up our conversation, I said, Jordan, I'm going to tell you, I said, they're going to make one that looks just like this, but they're not going to make one that feels like this. And he smiled and nodded, and, thank goodness he was, up till here, I guess he's still using it. But Titleist has probably made, they've told me on the tour, 20 or 30 pieces that have tried to look exactly like it, because obviously they want him back on a Titleist, and he probably will eventually go back to one if they make it just like mine. But I thought it was nice that he thought mine may perform better, and he's been using it ever since. I don't pay him any money, but I thought that was nice, nice gesture.
That's absolutely a nice gesture. The old saying that imitation is the biggest form of flattery, but I believe that a lot of the early Cameron putters were copies of original TP Mills putters.
They were. I know Scotty, and I've known him for a long time. We don't stay in touch as much as maybe we did early in the early days. He used to ask me questions about putter design. I'm probably a year or two older than him, but he used to ask me. He was a big collector of Mills putters, and thought a world of my dad and everything. How he turned that whole industry into a boutique. There was no such thing as a $500 putter in the 1980s. I mean, that was crazy money for, but that's what my dad charged. And there was a time when he could have charged a lot more, but he never did. And I asked him, I said, why don't you charge a lot more for your clubs? He goes, well, let me tell you why. He says, if a guy works hard like I did my whole life and he wants one of my clubs, if he saves his money, I want him to be able to afford it. And I don't want to price it where someone like that can't, because I've been there, and I've been broke, and I know what that's like. So people would buy his clubs and take them and resell them for double and triple. And they made a good living doing that. But he was the first to make the club where the craftsmanship and the soft lines and the balance and the flow of the club was just physically attractive to look at, but it also obviously performed. And uh, I can remember back in the 80s when I used to go out a lot on the tour, the Jacobsons and Irwins and Haas's and all those guys, they would all be, I'll tell you, they all happy to pay. And I've got another story that just popped in my head. You guys may be interested in, is that my dad had made a club for. No, I made it. I made a club for Fuzzy Zeller years ago, many years ago, and I watched him putt. I knew kind of how he putted, and I can look at a player, I can watch him putt, and I can say, okay, I think this works. It did the thing for Armour. So I built this club, and a buddy of mine went up to Williamsburg to the tournament. And Fuzzy was there, and at the time he was one of the best players in the world. And he walked by and he looked, and my buddy says, there he is. Go get him the club. I said, no, says I'm not going to do it because, we're going to charge him for it. I'm not going to, if he wants to come over to the bag first, then that would be the way I prefer it. Well, he eventually did come over and he putted with it, and he goes, man, this is right up my alley. And I said, well, take it out and try it and let me know. And he did, and came back, and he said, yeah, I love it. And he said, I said, Fuzzy, TP's going to charge you for that putter. He goes, oh, hardhead, said, tell him to send me a bill. I mumble and grumble, and probably one of the last events my dad went to, out of which event it was, but Fuzzy had been playing really good and giving TP a lot of advertising. Well, TP saw him. Fuzzy said, TP said, I love that club. He said, well, Fuzzy, I never got a check from you. He goes, well, damn, TP, how much you want for it? He said it's $500. You know how much it is. And he said, TP said, I'll give you three for it, or something like that. And I wasn't there. I was told the story. And it kind of got my dad hot. And he said, no, said, I can't do that. It's 500. And he goes, you hard head. He goes, I ain't paying you $500 for it. I says, I'm giving you a lot of advertising. He said, it's in my locker. And my dad said, well, Fuzzy said, I'm not going to your locker. Said that you go get it and bring it to me. And so he did. He went and got it, and cussing and fussing, and brought it to him. And TP took it and put it in a bag out by the putting green. And a true story, wasn't 20 minutes later, another pro came by and pulled that same putter up. It had been scratched up and dented. And he said, you mind if I play with it 9 holes? And he did, and came back. He said, how much are they now? And he said, they're $500. And the pro wrote him a check and took it and had bought a couple more from me since then. But believe it or not, it was Ben Crenshaw. So for Crenshaw to buy a club, that must be saying something.
Absolutely, it is.
So,
before we started, you were sharing a story about another famous player that you're making a putter for.
Well, a strange story, but I got a text about a little over a month ago, from a guy named David Graham. Do you remember that name?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, I didn't know David Graham was still alive, to be honest with you. I had known him years ago, but not well. But he sent me a text, and he goes, David, this is David Graham. He says, I'm a big admirer of your father's work and of yours. And I'm on the putting green here at Preston Trail, and I'm putting with Scotty's putter. And it's just one of the most stable, nicest putters, so on and on. There's one if there's a chance I could get one. And I didn't reply to his mail, but I called our mutual friend out there, and I said he must have been talking about Spieth's putter, because he's an older gentleman, and he goes, no, he was talking about Scotty Scheffler. And I said, really? I said, I never made Scott. He says, no, what happened was, he said, about a year and a half ago, I asked you to make him one, or a little over that, I guess. And you said you never heard of him and didn't know if he's worth a damn or not. And you didn't want to make it. And I told you he was going to be pretty good. You should go ahead and make one. And so you did, and it stayed in my shop for, gosh, no, how long, till he came by, and he, I told him, and he picked it up. But the story was that I said, well, what's the genesis of the story? He said, well, they were on the putting green. And he said, Spieth was trying to explain to Scheffler why he thought your putter felt so good. And David Graham was standing there, and he had obviously known T.P. Mills, and Scheffler was putting with that putter, the Mills, and David Graham had wanted to putt with it, and David Graham took some pictures of it and sent them to me, and I know Scheffler's a TaylorMade guy, and I don't even know him, so I've got to just say hello to him at some point in time. But I thought it was pretty neat that for people that don't pay or advertise, they have 3 Hall of Famers on Preston Trail all putting with your club.
Yeah, absolutely. What's that putter look like?
It was similar to Spieth, is what I call a trad 2. It was kind of a mix between a ping putter and a Mills, and that I took the heel behind the hosel, what we call a pintail, and I ground it to a point. I gave it there again, not having ever visited with him and not knowing what he looks like to putt with. I just made it just what I thought he might like, and evidently he was practicing with it. But it's something where I need to visit with him and just introduce myself and let him know if I can help him somewhere down the road. I'll do it. So
cool.
How you're not a Titleist company. How have you guys managed to really kind of stay relevant, where profitability and those kind of things with the TP Mills company?
Well, that's a good question. I think the quality of the build, the attention I give to each putter I make, no matter who it's for, I try to give it my full attention. I put my hands on it. Nobody else touches it but me. I know that kind of sounds old school, but I'm pretty particular about how the putter needs to look, and I think that's stood well for us over all these years. And I'm still able to win events. We won the I guess the 23-24 LPGA Tour Championship, the CMI, and broke the scoring record with a lady named Amy Yang. We don't advertise, and nobody would know that, but I thought, that was a nice victory on the ladies' tour. And so we stay relevant, by trying to do the job as best I can. And, I still get out on the tour and still visit with the players and the ones that I can, the ones that are able to maybe use the equipment, because as you know now, some of the players have the 14 club deal, and they're locked into whatever brand they use. So, and let me say this too: a player now is good enough. And I told Spieth this, and I'll tell you guys the same thing. A player now is good enough that if he practices enough with about any putter, he can learn to use it. He can adapt to it, where you and I can't. I use example like a fisherman. You can take a professional fisherman and you can give him your pole and your lure, and it's probably not what it should, but he can learn to use it and fish better than you can because he just has that much talent. So a good player can take any club within reason, and if he putts with it enough, he can acclimate to it. That may not mean it's the best for him, but he can acclimate to it, and he can probably do pretty well with it. What I try to do is try to explain to the player, what happens when you hit a putt with a putter, and how the ball rolls and why it does what it does, and explain to them a little bit how putters work, like I did with you guys, and that hopefully that gives them some belief that I know what I'm talking about, and makes them more accessible to trying the club.
I think, and I know time is short. I guess my last question would be, if your dad hadn't been making putters, what would you be doing today?
I don't know. That would be a great question. I'd probably be selling insurance somewhere. I'd probably be selling insurance or something like that. But I'm very lucky. I'm very thankful that as small as my company is, I've got to travel all around the world. I've got distributors all around the world. I don't produce a lot of clubs, but the ones I do produce, they seem to sell well. People still seem to think, a decent amount about the company and what we do. And, that's not saying that one day I might be with another company. I probably every year somebody will approach me and we'll discuss things. And if it works out, then I may do that. The one thing that I guess I regret a little bit, and it's not a regret, is that I think people think because I do what I do in the shop, that I may be limited to the golf putter or something like that. But you spend as much time with it as I have, you come up with some pretty good ideas. I've got a few that I'm working on that I think will make a difference. I've just got to figure out a way to get the ball rolling and get those ideas and things like that on the production floor.
I think is that a good place to kind of let you go?
Well,
we could talk for a week too.
Yeah, maybe we can do a part
we can
two.
do it too, and dive a little deeper and talk about a lot of neat things in the golf putters.
So, David, thanks again for stopping by with us. We've really enjoyed this time. The hour has flown by, and we'd love to have a part two with you at some point in the very near future.
Good deal. Well, I appreciate you guys. Appreciate your time, and let's do it again.
Thanks you so much.
And again, we want to thank David Mills for checking in with the Cart Barn today. Wonderful story about a putter company you may or may not have heard about, but you've probably seen one or played with one. If not, check your dad's golf bag or your grandpa's golf bag, because they might have one in there, and it might be worth some money. Who knows? But thanks again, David, for sharing a story about TP Mills putters. And you can also go to their website, tpmills.com, if you want a little more information or you're thinking about maybe trying one out.
Yeah, we want to get David back on, and he said he would be happy to do that. I think there's still some more stories to be told. A company that's been around Alabama since 1963. David makes some great putters, and I agree, Greg. Everyone needs to check them out. tpmills.com. Well, thanks again for listening to this week's edition of the Cart Barn Podcast. As always, we appreciate it. Every Wednesday we release another episode. So till next week, thanks again for listening to the Cart Barn Podcast.